Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Justin. It's good to be here.
So, we connected on LinkedIn because you had a post to say, hey, if you're an employee benefits consultant and also a Christian and want to merge those two things together, DM me. And so I did. And here we are having a podcast chat. So, thank you for providing for me an opportunity to grow in my faith, grow in my profession, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. No, it, I love more than anything being able to meld these two apparent worlds together. I think that as Christians, too many of us still see them separately. I have kind of my faith journey and my walk with the Lord, and I have my business endeavors, and yet we're called to glorify God in all that we do, and we don't get to turn the Christian switch on and off. And so anytime I get the opportunity to engage with other believers in the marketplace, I love the opportunity. So it's so cool to be able to do it.
I can't wait to learn a little bit more about your story. So I love the excuse of having a podcast because it allows these intentional relationships to happen. And
Mm.
so I've seen a little bit of your background just on your professional profile with you've got experience as a pastor, you got experience in the health field and sales coaching and Men of Greatness program. So tell us, who are you with that little bit of an intro?
Yeah. So who am I? So a lover of Jesus, first and foremost. My life was radically changed in August of 2006. Thankfully, to never be the person I once was. As the result of that, I can say that I'm married to my wife of nearly 24 years after almost throwing that away days before coming to faith in August of 2006, which is what led me and us to the Lord. I'm a father to two daughters, 23 and 15, almost 16. And so that's been a journey of both joy and challenge. I love fitness. And so it used to be competitive in nature. And now it's just more competitive with myself to make sure I'm staying healthy at 40 something years old, almost 47. And then professionally, I get paid to coach and consult. I work with organizations in the corporate world to help them create sales strategy and sales playbooks to go out and generate as much revenue as possible. And then on the personal development side of things, I'm engaging with men primarily, helping them to continue to be successful professionally without destroying their faith or their family in the process. And so I'm fortunate that I get to live out my faith in the workplace, that I get to be all of who God has called me to be, and I don't have to hide any of that. And so, yeah, man, it's a joy to get up just about every day.
Sounds like some really meaningful work, and our passions cross over in a number of ways. Where yes, like I said, noticed your post about employee benefits consultants, and that has been a surprising field for me to get into.
Mm.
I did not, I did not think 5 years ago, hey, I'm going to be a consultant in this field and get into health insurance. Like that was not on my radar at all. And I think it's a God moment to do that. And so let's go back to your God moment. Like, what happened in 2006, as much or little as you want to share, for you to say, hey, a change is needed in my life here?
Yeah, no, man. I tell people I'm an open book with many torn pages, so there's nothing that's off limits. And I wrote and published it in a book in September of 2023, so everybody knows anyway, or as many people as have read. So I was recently at a new organization. I was in an outside sales role, and we went to training in Chicago, Illinois. Up to that point, I had been married about 5.5 years to my wife. We had one daughter at the time who would have been about 4.5. And my wife and I were struggling. We were fighting over a lot of the things that married couples fight over: money, expectations, lack of communication. And particularly that last year leading up to this moment, We started the fights just started getting a lot more aggressive, not physically, but just definitely we're yelling a lot more. The idea of divorce and the word divorce came up a few times. I was starting to think about life would look like as a part-time father, and how I was going to navigate that, and who was going to get what. And anyway, so I ended up on this business trip, and really going into this business trip, and this just is so terrible for me to say, and I hate saying it out loud every single time I do, but I was thinking about the fact that I could go cheat on my wife because I was so far away and nobody would ever know. And so that was kind of part of the idea. And as was to be expected, Satan was right there and willing and ready. And by the second night, I gathered together with a group of people from the training, and we went out into Chicago, just had a ton of fun, ate at restaurants, just everybody was hammered, and ended up back at the hotel bar and got flirty with one of the girls that was in the training, one of the ladies that was in the training. And little by little, people started peeling off to go to bed. And as you would expect, it was she and I that were kind of left in the bar at the end of the night. And the conversation ended, at least down there, with my room or yours. And by God's grace, me not knowing the Lord at that time, I ended up in my bed by myself. I woke up the next morning, and I just realized that I couldn't understand what I was doing with my life to that point. I was successful externally. That was 2006. I was making over 100 grand a year at 28 years old, which used to be a lot of money to make. And I had a brand new or a nice house in a affluent area in Southern California. My wife was driving a Mercedes. I was driving a nice truck, and we had all these toys, like all the stuff that I didn't have as a child growing up because I was raised by a single mom. All the things that I thought were the marks of true success, I had them, all of them. And yeah, I felt so hollow inside, just absolutely empty. And I remember laying in bed that morning in the hotel room, and I just thought to myself, like, man, I have tried everything and nothing's working. And I remember this statement I made, which was, I might as well give God a shot. And I'd grown up in the Catholic Church, so I knew of God. I just didn't really get it. I had been disenfranchised in my early teens. And so what would follow was I ended up down, or we went to the airport the next or that day. I ended up in the airport waiting alongside one of my coworkers who I knew was a Christian. And funny enough, he was drinking this big schooner of a margarita. And I remember going to him and I was like, Darren, how could you drink that? You're a Christian. And he chuckled and said, oh, he goes, you have no idea, do you? And that led to a 3-hour conversation at O'Hare Airport and a 5-hour conversation sitting next to each other on the flight home. And he just shared with me of his experience of Christianity. What I loved and what I really needed in that moment was not to be told how screwed up I was, but just to hear of a hope in a different life that Darren had than I did. And I remember at one point asking him, like, so what does this all mean for me? And he said that's for you to figure out. He didn't, and people can argue right or wrong, but like he didn't lead me in the sinner's prayer. He didn't try and stick me on a moment of like, so have you decided that you've screwed up in your life and you need Jesus? It was, you need to figure this out on your own. And I think he read the room. I think he knew enough of who I was. And so that was a Wednesday. Going to bed that night, I said to my wife, we need to go to church this Sunday. And we had friends that had been inviting us to church for years. One of my closest friends had been over and over again telling me what an idiot I was and how much church I needed. And I never listened. And so we decided that Sunday to go to church. Well, it just so happened that that couple couldn't go that Sunday. And so we were going to go all by ourselves. And we ended up in a building with about 800 people in there and knew nobody. And the pastor got up and preached a message on what it meant to be a godly husband and a godly father.
Wow.
And that's all I needed to hear, was the fact that I'd been trying so hard, definitely to provide for my family. I loved my wife. I loved my daughter. I knew right from wrong, but I was just being clouded and distorted and misled by this worldly idea of what it meant to be successful as a man. And I heard the true heart of Jesus and what it meant to lay down my life for my wife and my kids. And yes, to provide for and protect them, but that it meant so much more than just money in the bank or a nice house to live in. And that began just the craziest journey. It took about 4 years to restore our marriage completely. We would renew our wedding vows at the 10-year mark. That was 2011. And that was an incredible moment of finally laying it all down once and for all. And yeah, man, it just that was the beginning of a season of my life that I'm still riding right now. And I just cannot believe that God did that for me. Like I didn't deserve that. I didn't even think I needed that, and yet the Lord saw fit to grab me out of the very, very bottom of the pit. And I was moments away from ruining my life forever. And for some reason, God saved me. And I will never, ever, ever not only forget that moment, but celebrate that moment for the rest of my life.
I mean, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate it, and to just go to the heart of the issue so quickly to hear that. And I can see why that experience and that transformation led you to helping other men. So maybe that's a good thread to pull on. Tell us how you went from your own personal transformation and restoring your marriage to then wanting to encourage other men.
Yeah. So I am a all in or not in at all guy, which was what got me into a lot of trouble with alcohol and some drugs and gambling pre Christ. But afterwards, I threw myself all into Jesus and understanding what it meant to be a man of faith and to live that out. And again, that took some time and a lot of rough edges had to be worn down and still are. But I started to realize that I
Mm.
I'm a guy's guy and like I can throw down with the best of them, whether that's in the gym or in a sport or getting into a fight or whatever. And so it was like, guys saw me. I was thankfully, I was looked up to by other guys around me. I was kind of always the center of attention, loud mouth, but also because, I just kind of like led things. And so I was realizing that I had all of this opportunity of influence and it was time to start using that to help these guys in a real way. And on top of that, I was watching, the beginning of the end of the destruction of society as we know it today, which was the abdication of responsibility in men, just not being leaders and not being the true head of their household and laying down their life for their families. And anyway, so I just started to be inspired to do that. So I would become a pastor of a church. We planted a church alongside two other guys in 2012. And so I would get more involved in men's fellowship and in serving men in that capacity. But it really wasn't until probably 2020 when I started to go, I don't want to say all in, but more consciously in on this effort. And so, I see so many guys today that work hard, that are good dudes, whether they're Christian or not, but they feel this gap. It's like that emptiness that I had. Maybe it's not a complete hollow hole inside of them, but they know that there is this gap between where they are and who they desire to become. And they can't figure out how to fix it. Like, and that gap could exist in their relationship. It's like they love their wife loves them, but there's just something missing, that fire. They're not, I don't know if I can say this on this podcast, but like they're not having sex on a regular basis, or, they love their children love them, but there's just that not that deep connection. In business, they're working really, really hard, but there's this gap between where they are and where they see their peers, and they want that for themselves. And those are good, healthy desires. And I just know from firsthand experience, and then not just for myself, because then other people started telling me their story too, that gap is a gap that only the Lord can fill. First of all, right? It is that idea that I must be grounded in faith. If I'm going to ever live out a real purpose in life, if I'm ever going to achieve true greatness, I need to know where I've come from and who in fact put me here. And that's Jesus. Like that's it. Like there's just no other answer. And so as I started to like that just started to resonate with me, and I got really excited about that. And so yeah, man, I've started to go all in on that idea of helping these guys close that gap. And it's fun too because I'll give a quick example in this industry. So in the benefits world, so I was at a conference in Puerto Rico in 2024. 2024, yeah, last year. And we were leaving the conference, and I've built a lot of great relationships with a lot of the men in this industry. And we're leaving the conference, and I spoke to this woman, and I was like, "Oh, hey, I haven't seen you in a while." And I said, "What are you doing here?" And she goes, "Oh, I just got here." I said, "Just got here?" I said, "This is the last day of the conference." And she said, "Well, I can't make the conference, but I'm here because we're going to retreat for a few days with some of the other ladies." And I was like, "Son of a gun. Why don't we have that for these men?" And so I get on the plane flying home, and I'm with my wife because she came out to the conference with me. And I'm like, "Babe, what do you think about this? Like, I got to get these guys together. We got to do a retreat." And she goes, "You absolutely have to do that." So I start texting guys on the plane. And before I land back in California, so about 9 hours from Puerto Rico all the way home with a stop, I had 12 guys of the 15 I had sent texts to saying, "I am in if you do a retreat." And so fast forward to August of 2024, because of a couple of sicknesses and a couple of things at the last minute, 9 guys plus myself all got together in Scottsdale. And I told them, I said, business can be a topic of discussion, but it is not going to be the main topic of discussion. And Justin, when I say like there was crazy vulnerable discussions, I like it doesn't even communicate the depths of these men bearing it all. Some of them knew each other, some of them did not, but all shared industry, right? And not all believers either, but just bearing their souls, their struggles with their own personal wrestles with sin or whatever they call that, and their
Mm.
challenges in their marriage, their desires to be better men. They all left, and every one of them said this in one version or another, that they could not. They had no idea what to expect, especially when I kind of took business out of the equation when we got together in the first place, and they were all blown away by
Mm.
how much their perspective changed by seeing other men that were willing to be open and vulnerable about the things that they struggled with. And so it was like, here's all us guys sharing industry, doing a lot of business together, building friendships, but had never gotten that raw and real. And when we did, it just changed everything. Now we have a text thread that's been going
Mm.
for over a year, encouraging each other in all kinds of ways, still poking fun at each other all the time too. And so it's like that's what's so exciting to me is I'm just living out the call that God has on my life wherever he has it. And it just so happens by accident I got into EB in 2014, and here I am all these years later still helping organizations on the sales side and grow, but more than anything, I'm helping these men to become the men that God has called them to, whether they know it yet or not.
That's great. It's so inspiring for me to hear that too, because there's a part of me that says, "Gosh, I have this desire with this nonprofit, the Seal Thomas Fellowship, as I was telling you about before we were recording, to honor my father, and just to make sure that I'm being a man that is living out the call that God has placed in my life." And
Mm,
so, for me, this was a passion project during the pandemic to pick up the mic and start talking about providing, and I didn't
mm,
know like where this would go, like, as far as the show. And then, as I mentioned, surprisingly, found myself in the employee benefits field as well. So I'm trying to do both, right? Like I'm trying to
mhm.
live out this life faith and also trying to grow that business. So it's great to hear how you are serving those men and using your skills as well, doing that, which, I was excited about this conversation to begin with as well. So for those that are trying to do what we're doing, like meaning be a man of faith and be excellent at their work. What have you learned in your career? What have you learned from maybe coaching other men to just give us a little inspiration? How can we do that well?
Yeah, gosh. I really want this to be um, not something that I'm prescribing to other people as much as I'm just suggesting as an opportunity for them to see that there's something greater for them out there. So I just want to preface that with this. Um, like I said earlier, I think it all begins with um, most men, we have this deep desire in us to do big things. We want to perform at a high level. We want to be awesome, top step at the podium, whatever. Like in that one thing, we want to be amazing. We want to be great. I just don't understand. No, not even that. That is impossible apart from, as I said earlier, knowing who put you here in the first place. Because if I don't know God, then I cannot live out his purpose for my life. And there is no greater purpose to live out. And this is not just about being obedient to the tenets of Christianity. This is actually like God has created an insanely abundant life for you. And that looks very different for people, right? This is not always about practical prosperity, but you can't accomplish that. And so for most men, like we're making plans, we're creating strategy and ideas. None of that can be done effectively apart from first knowing who God is, knowing Jesus as Lord and Savior. And that's a hard thing for some people to accept. Maybe, even though you're very faith forward in this show, I'm sure that most people listening are Christian, but there's just that person. And it's not about believing what I believe for the sake of believing it or what you believe for the sake of believing it. It's because it's what's best for you. And it's not just a heaven or hell thing either. It is so much about, if you want the best life humanly possible, it's faith in Jesus first. So that's where I start. And that's the first encouragement that I give to every single human being that I talk to, man or woman. Then secondly is, as I start to um, live my life day to day, I want to come from a place of authenticity. So, like my hat, be authentic. My youngest daughter helped me kind of come up with that years and years ago. But I want to reflect the very best of who God has created me to be in everything that I do. And that's really what authenticity is. It's to be of known origin, meaning we have to know where we come from. So as you're creating your habits and disciplines, my encouragement is make sure that they reflect the best version of the man that you desire to be. Don't waste your time on things that don't align with who you are. Just because some guru says, to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, to read 52 books a year, to, maximize your time in the office every single day, that may not be what the Lord has for you. And so you need to figure out what works best for who God has created you to be. And so that's what it truly means for me to be authentic in action. And we can take tips and wisdom and advice from all kinds of people, but I think that's incredibly important. And then the last piece I say is like, be purposeful in pursuit, meaning if it doesn't matter, don't do it. I think that a lot of times we spend time trying a bunch of different things until we figure out what sticks. And I understand that sometimes we don't always know our ultimate purpose in life, but deep down, we all have this burning desire. I heard Dave Ramsey, who's obviously very well-known influencer in today's culture. I saw him at an event not too long ago, and he said from the stage, he goes, that one thing that burns so deep inside of you that you can't stop, like you can't ignore it. And I was like, yeah. He goes, that's the thing you pursue every single day.
Mm.
And I thought, oh man, all the things I've wasted my life on because it was cool, or because it was what my buddy was doing, or it was because what the latest greatest influencer was doing. And again, it's not that those are bad things, but I want to do what burns hottest inside of me, because that's how I'm going to get to the end of what's going to make me most happy, what's going to create the most fulfillment inside of me. So that grounded in faith, authentic in action, and purposeful in pursuit are really three things that I try to encourage every single man, for sure, but every human being can take it to the same degree, to live out. And that takes a lot of exploration because we don't always know what those things are. We don't always know who we are. But those things to me are most important. I'll say
Mm,
one other thing too. And actually, what one of the things that caught me so much about your show, that when I was like, oh man, I would love to be on your podcast,
mm.
was you talked about you talk about provision. And I think as men, our default nature around provision is financial. And I think that that is absolutely important. The Bible's very, very clear that a man must provide for his household. So, like, I had a friend that was out of work from the insurance world. He actually just recently got a job, but he was out of work for like 7 months. He was Uber driving during the day and working a Home Depot shift from 10 o'clock at night until 2 o'clock in the morning just to contribute to his household, though he could have hung out because his wife made a bunch of money. So, like, provision practically, financially is an absolute necessity. But I think what most men, again, high performing, driven men, look over is that that's not all that provision means. That provision is also about us providing ourselves to those that need us most. And so, as a quick example, before I became a Christian, when I was making good money in my mid 20s, I was working 12, 14-hour days in the name of providing for my family. But I wasn't at home very much. Now, little did most people know that I was really just building the kingdom of Ryan in the name of providing for my family. But my family didn't have me. My wife did not have a husband home on a regular basis. My youngest daughter, by the grace of God, does not remember much of this and was not negatively impacted by it. But I wasn't there for so many of the most important things. I didn't get to drop her off at school in the morning, pick her up in the afternoon because I was too busy working. And for what? For a bigger house, for a nicer car? It's like my kid didn't care about any of that stuff. She wanted her daddy. And I think for us, like, when we think of provision, and I'm sure you would agree with this, but like, we have to understand that in reality, that's probably far more important than the financial provision that most of us are after.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head to say yes. I define provider as one who blesses and protects. And
Mm,
to your point, that could be a myriad of things, which is just
mm.
so exciting, right? Um, so very much in alignment there. And what are some of your favorite Jesus provision moments? Like as you look at his life, as you look at his ministry, is there a story, a parable, a moment that stands out to you of like, oh, that's kind of cool how Jesus provided in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some pretty cool ones. Like the story of Job is obviously just so paramount in so many ways, and has a lot of direct impact on my life. But the one above all is definitely the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. So I wrote a book called Wounds: How Hurt, Heartache, and Tragedy Become the Keys to Unlocking Greatness, and it traces 9 significant wounds, hurts in my life. Some of those I did, some of those others did to me. The reason I wrote that book, though, was because in October 2017, my wife and I and 5 of our friends were in Las Vegas, Nevada at a country music festival when the mass shooting took place that claimed the lives of 58 people. One of those people was my close friend that was standing off my right shoulder that night.
Oh,
And in the aftermath of that, so many people kept asking. There's too long of a story to tell behind this, but I ended up being interviewed for People Magazine and
mm,
CNN and the local news stations. And one of the things that so many people asked me, especially once they knew that I was a bivocational pastor at that time, was where was God? And what I realized then, and I said then, but it would become more, I would become more aware of it as I wrote my book, was at the end of Joseph's story, or at the end of the story of Joseph in the Bible, there's this moment where Joseph's brothers, who had sold him into slavery, ultimately left him for dead. They knew they had met revenge because they were facing Joseph at a time when they needed to be provided for, and Joseph could have done anything and everything to them. and instead he provided for them. But with these words, it wasn't even the practical provision that they needed in the midst of famine that was so important. He provided to them a word that we all need. And it was, for me, Joseph says, paraphrased, what man meant for evil, God meant for good. And that word has provided to me life in the most, sorry, I get emotional, in the most difficult seasons of my life. Even the ones that happened previous to that, when in 2013, my family and I lost everything, our house, our car, like all of our toys, everything gone. When we lost our friend in 2017, when through the hurt of church, I had to step down from pastoral ministry, not because of something I did, but something that was done to me. And all of these losses, every single hurt, every single struggle. And it was like, Lord, where are you? And why are you doing this to me? And that word was so clear. It was, Ryan, what you or what others meant for evil, I mean for good.
Hmm.
And it may not make sense right now. It may not make sense for years. But trust me when I tell you, good will come of this. I, God, will be glorified. Ryan, you will be transformed. You will be renewed. You will be refreshed. You will be used for God's good and God's glory. And it just all started to make sense. And that has provided to me just the most motivational, inspiring word in such simplicity, but so much power. So it's what I have to cling on to, because life is just not easy. And especially as we aspire to do bigger and better things, it seems to just get harder and harder. When Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation, he really meant it. And I need that. I need that for myself. And that is one thing that I try to share with so many other people is, man, let me tell you, I'm not trying to diminish the hurt. I'm not trying to diminish the evil, but God has something for you if you will just trust in him and continue to put one foot in front of the other as you go forward.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to honor that story and just say, kind of thank you for sharing some of those wounds and for writing it down. I bet that was a hard process. What made you say, "Hey, I've had a lot of wounds. Let me expose all these to the world." They're obviously very sensitive even now. And what made you say, "Yes, I want to write these down"?
Eventually, initially, people wanted me to write a story about my experience at Route 91. That was the country music festival, because it was so just, out there, such a big story. And I said, no, I didn't want to profit at all on the back of my friend, the other 57 people that were killed, or the 22,000 people that were at that concert and had their lives negatively impacted forever. So it took me a long time, but I finally came to the realization that that story of Joseph, like, we all have one. And I would have never, ever been able to latch on to that story had somebody not written it down. And I'm not at all comparing myself to Joseph. So please, God, nobody hear that. But my life is not my own. My life, your life, everybody's life, it is an opportunity to be an example and to share in the journey. Like, it is so isolating, especially as a man, to feel sadness, to hurt, because there's not a lot of space for that, to share the deep, dark secrets of potential or real infidelity, or even when we talk about things in the church world like pornography, it's talked about in such like a disconnected manner. And I want to be an example in saying, I am willing to go first. Talk about manning up. I'm willing to man up and put it all out there because I know somebody else needs it too. And Justin, when I was writing my book with the publisher that helped me, they ask you for a champagne moment. They say, what is the champagne moment when your book is published, and that's the moment you crack the champagne bottle? And they said it can't be when you're on the New York Times bestsellers list, because that doesn't happen for most people. Like what is the truly impactful moment? And I wrote this down, and I said that the day that a complete stranger reaches out to me and says that they read my book and it transformed their life. And so I published in September of 2023. And in February, March of 2024, a man reached out to me on LinkedIn, said he didn't know how he got a copy of my book. I had never met him before in my life. He said, but he started reading it and realized that after 18 years of marriage and being on the verge of divorce with 2 children, that he needed a change in his life. And we hopped on a call. That was all by LinkedIn DM, by the way. We ended up hopping on a call. I was able to coach him, and then eventually end up even coaching he and his wife. And their marriage is in a far better place than it's ever been in since the day they got married. And like, the coaching's cool, and I'm glad for the opportunity to do business, but frankly, I don't care. What I care about is that I was willing to put myself out there, and one person's life was changed. And I know it's been more than that, but that's what caused me to be willing to do this in the first place, was like, I got nothing to hide. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. I don't like that my kids have read some of the things that are in that book. Other people that know me, it's definitely hurt some of my business opportunities, but it's opened the door to conversations that are truly life transformational.
Mm. A very authentic, speaking of your hat,
Hmm.
champagne moment of really thinking about, well, what would be transformational for me is to see transformation happen after people read the book, and to have that happen. What a gift. That is truly a gift. I love that. If people want to connect with you now, where's a good place for them to do that? Because it sounds like you do some coaching, personal and sales, but in this season, like, what are you focused on, and how can we connect more with you in that work?
Yeah, the easiest way is you can go to ryanjamesmiller.com/connect.
Yeah.
And that's where the social channels are. So I create a couple of YouTube videos a week. My podcast goes there as well as the other podcast platforms. I have a podcast called Unlocking Greatness. And so that's the best place to go. There's a free resource you can download around uh, dealing with and overcoming negative thought and emotion, which is something that a lot of us deal with. So that's the best place to start. Again, as much as I would say, like, I would love all the business I could possibly get, whether that's coaching or going to a retreat or whatever. I just want to have conversations just like this. That's what these to me bring me far more joy than most business opportunities do, because this is life. And so that's what I'm looking for, is just to connect with other like-minded individuals, particularly men, that resonate with this message and that either want to be a proponent for change or need change themselves.
I can tell you're doing good work. I mean, obviously, this is authentic to you. And just like you reflected on Dave Ramsey saying, what is that burning inside of you? Do more of that. So
Mm.
I get the sense that you took that charge seriously. And I also like to ask my guest, you're doing a lot to provide for others, whether that's coaching, writing your book, doing retreats. In this season, how are you providing for yourself as we begin to wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, so for the longest time, I loved being the smartest person in the room. That felt really good until I realized that that was the worst thing I could possibly do to myself. So I started seeking out coaches, mentorship, and guidance. And so today, for right now, I'm in a mastermind with 3 other men, like minded, entrepreneurial in spirit and in business. And so we meet together weekly. And so they pour into me significantly. So that's been of huge benefit. Secondly, the way that I'm providing for myself is I have a completely open relationship or open line of communication with my wife. And so she pours into me in the most incredible ways. And I think that we think different. We're very different personalities. And she's a woman and I'm a man, right? There's just going to be differences there. But I think that men overlook the asset that their wives can be to them in providing what they need. But that requires a lot of practice and communication. So my wife is second to that. And then I've really latched on to a few close friends. My mastermind guys are definitely close friends, but a few other men that just inspire me through the way that they live their life. And so I try to regularly grab lunch, coffee. I'm always trying to find that next person that can pour into me in some way. I was at a Christian business event 2 weeks ago. I heard this guy speak and he was just so powerful. And he's a local guy. I'd never met him before. And so I found a way to get connected to him. I text him and I'm like, hey, your story inspired me. I just love to grab coffee. No agenda. And I went in an hour and a half, got to have coffee and breakfast with him and just be poured into. He's about 20 years older than me. And so I'm trying to do that a lot more too, just to find people to invest into my life, whether I've got to pay for that, which I'm totally down to do, or just find that through some kind of friendly type of relationship.
I love that. It's so practical. And yet a lot of us don't do that. And for some reason, we think, especially guys, oh gosh, I'm called to lead or disciple others and no one's pouring into me. Well, are you open to it? Like, are you actually
Mm-hmm.
reaching out? And just like you did, you honored that individual that gave the talk and did, and said, hey, I'd just love to grab coffee, no agenda. And at the same time, you're willing to say sometimes it will be just a personal relationship. Other times it might be a paid engagement. And to be open to that, I think is really inspiring. It rather than just shrugging off and saying, gosh, I'm pouring out, I'm providing for others, and yet no one is doing the same for me. So I think it takes a little bit
Yeah.
of humility with that. Um, this has been awesome. Ryan, was there a story or anything that I did not give you a chance to reflect on today that you wanted to before we say your goodbyes?
No, I feel like I talked too much, so it's great.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way because I hope that means that you felt at home on a podcast with somebody that you had
Yeah,
no idea anything about other than just an online connection. And this is so great. I think this is the beginning of a friendship, honestly, and I can't wait to debrief with you after this as well. So,
I agree.
with that, let's see. You got the book Wounds, and then your website. Just say that one more time, and then
Yep.
we'll end there.
Yeah, ryanjamesmiller.com/connect.
Great, Brian. Thanks so much for the time.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks for listening to Provide Like Jesus. Go bless and protect someone today, and remember to keep providing for yourself by subscribing to our free weekly newsletter at clthomasfellowship.org. You can also connect with me on social media at JustinThomasNC, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.